I wanted to learn more about your actual studies that you did in regards to cocaine. And was that before the psychedelic stuff, or did that lead up to it? And
that was concurrent.
That was concurrent with the psychedelic stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I always like did the psychedelics sort of like the psychedelic research on the side because like there was hardly any funding for it. So I kind of kept my day job, so to speak, by getting these grants to do research with cocaine, which I also found very interesting. And
how do you get a grant to do research for cocaine?
You apply to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so what I did some research when I was a postdoc after I got my PhD on like the interactions between cocaine and nicotine and caffeine. But the more interesting stuff was the stuff that I conducted as principal investigator, got my own grant. I had a line of research where I took behavioral economic models. So a lot of my work has been using like economic concepts and studying human decision making to understand drug use, like and addiction. And so I developed these. I took this model from behavioral economics called delay discounting, so offering people choices between smaller sooner versus larger later amounts of money. And people who are addicted to whether it's cocaine or cigarettes or anything tend to be more immediate focused. They tend to take the smaller sooner at the expense of the larger later. And so I applied that to cocaine and sexual risk. I did this with methamphetamine and alcohol too. Drugs that are associated with risky sex, like which can lead to HIV and all kinds of whatever unintended consequences, unintended pregnancy.
Right.
But asking people hypothetical decisions about if you were in this you met this person at somewhere, and first they pick out amongst all these like 60 photos what person they'd have casual sex with. As long as they're getting along, and so it's kind of fun for people. It's like, oh yeah, whatever. Gender is something there for everyone. You can pick one gender, two genders, all of the above, whatever you're into. And then from that, we do these tasks of like asking them, okay, so let's say they're down, would you use a condom or not? Just like your likelihood on a scale. And they make the rating. And typically even like high risk people, like cocaine addicted people, would say, there's some exceptions, but they'd say, no, I'm very likely to use a condom. But then you say, okay, now you got to wait 5 minutes. You're having unprotected sex now or waiting 5 minutes. And then different delays, like sometimes it's an hour. It could go up to like next day, you got to get together tomorrow. But you could see that as you had to wait to use sex with a condom, you would see that would drastically change their function. They would shift towards unprotected sex. And then we got people loaded on cocaine. So we administered cocaine to them. And it didn't touch those money decisions. So whether they'd want the $50 now or $100 in a month. But for these sexual decisions that had a strong effect, they'd be like, no, I'm down now. Like they're on cocaine. And so which to me, it opened up a lens of like, this is where it's not just this association of cocaine with it's like if you talk to people like they're heavy cocaine users, and they'll just do like wild stuff. Like I remember stories of like one guy in a treatment study I was running was we would have him talk about contexts in which they would use cocaine. He's like, okay, a lot of times I'm hanging out with my female cousin. This is a guy, and it's like we'd get high, and let's just say we'd move from the kitchen into the bedroom and she wouldn't be my cousin anymore, if you hear me. Like things like this. Like there's all kinds of things that people, and there's a good number of folks that would, they identify as straight. But once coke's in the system, it's like, wow. Yeah, that story doesn't hold up.
And they start divulging this stuff when they're on cocaine?
Well, those stories come from people, not when they're on cocaine, but they seem like very credible because they're not like.
I see.
Nothing. These aren't things to brag about. Like, right. Yeah, just people I've been able to talk to in the context of these studies. Because I always like whether it's cocaine or psychedelics. Like, I've really valued sitting down and really talking to people. Like, and a lot of scientists that do the type of thing I do, there can be a judgment, and like, oh, these are cocaine users. These are, like. It's like, no, like, tell me how do you score coke in Baltimore? Where do you, oh, you call it like Ready Rock. What's that? Oh, yeah, it's like, it's a Baltimore thing, you know, like, okay, do you sell it in like $5 amounts? Like, you know, how do you do it? Like, what would you say? You know, just wondering, you know, oh, the different types of heroin on East Side, West Side, Baltimore. Like, I want to know, like, all these things that people, you know, like, you know, and understand like what people are, what's motivating them and like how, like, just the sociology of the drug use environment and what's motivating people. And so I've really valued that aspect. So I'll usually take the time to, you know, kind of really get to know people and try to understand these things. And some of it is in the context, like the guy with his cousin, that was in the context of, we're, as part of the study, we're having them talk about the environments that they normally use in. But yeah, so cocaine and sex, though, go like, and same with methamphetamine, they go hand in hand. You ask any...
Oh, with methamphetamine, same thing?
Meth and sex. So any psychomotor stimulant and sex, they are like strong...
How do you explain
people
that?
People get randy. And so, and I showed for the first time, even though, you know, anecdotally, like anyone could have told you this, it's been around cocaine a lot, but we showed under double-blind conditions that just cocaine increases sexual arousal to a substantial degree. So people get horny when they're on cocaine or methamphetamine. Sometimes, more so with cocaine, sometimes, not always, it interferes with the ability to perform.
Right.
So for the male.
With Viagra.
Right.
Have you heard
which
the story
is a
of Dan
thing.
Bilzerian? I don't know if you heard the story. This is this dude named Dan Bilzerian. He was like a playboy type guy who was always riding around on yachts with like tons of women.
Yeah.
And he had a heart attack in his 20s. And he explains he was in Vegas doing coke for like 3 days straight. And he said that like he went to go have sex with this chick and he couldn't get it up. So he ate like 4 Viagras and he started to have a heart attack and he had to go to the ER. And he ended up having like 2 heart attacks or something crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not a good combination.
No, especially in your 20s.
And a lot of people have used, same thing can happen with MDMA, but like, so Viagra, I think about 25 years ago, at least it was in some headlines, people would call it sextasy, like the combo of like MDMA, ecstasy, and
so does that have the same effect?
Viagra. Well, yeah, like what just counteract, MDMA can cause impotence.
Oh, really?
So it's like one might feel more romantic and cuddling up and everything, but if they want to seal the deal, right. So same with Coke, not always, but it just, it's like heavy alcohol, like the will might be there, but the things may not function totally.
Sure.
But nonetheless, it's enough of it. It's not a black or white thing, you know, because there's plenty of, that's one of the issues. That's how I got the grant funding to look at these drugs, both meth and Coke.
So hypothetically,
there's a lot of HIV because of, with heroin, it's more of injecting. With Coke and meth, it's more of like, no, I just, got loaded and did some crazy stuff. And a lot of it's like men on the, there's a thing it was on Oprah decades ago, Brothers on the Down Low, like probably because of stigma. It was like amongst African American men that didn't want to admit that they occasionally, or more than occasionally, had male partners. That then they didn't tell they kept it from the female, so there was a transmission of HIV. Oh wow! Because they were having anal sex with males, but then
which is higher, transmitting, more chance of getting HIV that way.
Much, dramatically. Which is like, and sometimes I think we don't do the public a service because we're too prudish. It's like unprotected anal sex is like that was always the issue.
So if you're
like that's
gay,
a very
doing cocaine, you're more likely to get AIDS because you're going to take the roll the dice by not if you don't have a condom.
So the answer is have a condom on you.
Right.
Like
especially gay cokeheads out there. Keep condoms on you.
It's not because
this is Pride Month. We're doing them a service.
Yeah, because you don't know where things like people I worked with. It's like yes, and you meet someone at the laundromat. One thing, like whatever, like just. Having I was actually wanted to do some research on didn't get the funding for it, but just trying to encourage people to carry condom on like high risk populations, men who have sex with men who have a history of sex that they regret, with novel partners, unprotected, but just to like reinforce them, like if we text you like a few random times a week and you happen to have a condom in your wallet, we'll give you $10. Like just to get them in the habit of just carry a condom on you.
Right.
Which would really help because, you could be moralistic and Puritan and say, oh no, you shouldn't, but like, okay,
Right.
like whatever, at least, because what my research showed me was that not always, but most of the time when these supposedly high risk populations, when they had the choice, they would say they'd use a condom if they had it there.
Right.
But when they're rolling, like, and when it's not just the coke, but also just the, breaking the action, biology's happening, and it's like someone's got to stop and say, hold on, do you have
Right.
no.
Right. What's the phrase? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush or something like, what is it? Two in the hand is worth, no.
Yeah, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush,
right,
yeah.
Right, exactly. I'm not gonna risk this opportunity right now.
Oh yeah, maybe she or he will, whatever, second guess, and just once things are going, you don't want to put the brakes on,
Exactly.
and you add coke to that or meth, and it's like even
gas on fire.
Yeah, so
hypothetically, not that me or anyone I know would ever do such a thing, but in a purely scientific laboratory setting, if somebody was on cocaine and their pee-pee didn't work, what drug would they use?
Well, they would use Viagra.
That would
or
be
the other, or Cialis.
But those are not safe combinations.
Well, first of all, cocaine's not safe.
Right. Well, if you
so this is all a relative conversation. So there will always be, well, there's some exceptions, but
everything's
virtually
in
a
moderation.
Combination of two things is almost always riskier than taking one thing.
Right.
So two drugs
exactly
is usually
you're compounding
more
the
risk. So yes, there's risk, but most toxic drug effects are dose and frequency dependent, meaning, the guy taking 4 Viagra's, like, one thinks, well, couldn't he have tried one?
right.
Maybe he wouldn't have had a heart attack. He still could have. Still a risk, but
with I don't understand though. So the Viagra is just like it's like a vasodilator, right? So like how would that hypothetically mixed with cocaine cause a heart attack? Do you know?
I don't know. Cocaine can be a vasoconstrictor.
Right.
I'm not even sure a cardiologist wouldn't. The cardiologist probably would know something about how Viagra could cause a cardiac event, but no one probably knows specifically about the combination together.
Right.
I mean, we know cocaine. I mean, simply at the level of increasing blood pressure and pulse, like you do that with anything, which is why even to a mild degree, psilocybin can be a risk for a cardiac event in people at severe heart disease risk.
Oh, really?
Because it has a modest effect on blood. But these are the same people that they could have a cardiac event going up a couple flights of stairs, or it's actually pretty common, like people having sex. Guy shows up to the ER, like having sex with his wife or whoever.
Yeah, totally.
Like anything that raises your heart up, heart rate up and your blood pressure for people who had severe risk can push them over the edge. So even psilocybin can be a risk and very at risk, which you weed people out in research easy to check their blood pressure.
Right.
But
Wild. Why are some of the best artists, musicians, and writers? What is the connection between them and tons of like alcohol and coke?
Yeah.
Like there's an obvious pattern here.
The disinhibition from alcohol, like the loosening the bound, and then the stimulation from the cocaine to kind of counteract the downside of alcohol, the sedation.
Right.
So, I mean, cocaine and alcohol together, alcohol changes the metabolism of cocaine. So you actually get,
it changes the metabolism.
Yeah. So you get another psychedelic, I'm sorry, not psychedelic, but another stimulant compound, cocaine derivative from the metabolism when you're also consuming alcohol. And so you actually get a synergistic effect.
Wow.
Yeah. Sort of like with cannabis for people that take it orally, one of the metabolites that you don't get when you smoke, when you take it orally, is one of the metabolites when it's broke down in the liver is also a cannabinoid that has very potent psychoactive effects. So kind of a similar thing, but alcohol will. So they go hand in hand, coke and alcohol, and I don't know that.
And you have like famous artists, like musicians specifically, that once they go sober, their art just starts to suck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's some examples to the contrary, but yeah, I think that's a real
There's
thing
definitely,
too.
yeah, I think there's some
You
examples
want to
to
think
the
there's still
contrary.
hope, like, 'cause it's like
Yeah.
the person's burning themselves out.
Of course,
and there's
you
plenty
can't
of
do it
old rock
forever.
stars that say like, I finally had to give the stuff
Yeah,
up, and
man.
like, but
Yeah.
you have to look back and you're like, I don't know, these like bands that were just like, would they be who they were without wild drug use?
Right.
And probably not. And it's not always just the cannabis and the psychedelics. Sometimes, it's like crazy coke and alcohol. Like Metallica, like, they were really, really, really heavy drinkers in the early days, and like to what degree? Eddie Van Halen,
Yeah.
like all of those classic, like all of those first several albums, like coke and alcohol. Like he was drunk all the time apparently, and just like how could he do it? And is it just that it's amazing that he did it and wasn't held back by those, or did they actually enhance?
Right.
I don't like. You have to be open to it. And you don't want people to do these. They're very dangerous doing a bunch of coke and alcohol.
Yeah.
But
it just seems like there's an enhancement. It seems like there's some sort of, it seems like it strengthens some sort of a connection to something, to some sort of like, it unlocks some sort of creative thing that may not be inside you, that they could be I don't know, maybe they're tapping into it. I don't know what it is. I'm sure you're familiar with that book, The War of Art, by Stephen Pressfield, where he talks about the muse.
Yeah.
It's all this idea that like, if you can meditate and focus on writing, or he was a writer, so he would like write for X amount of hours, and all of a sudden like this weird sort of consciousness would start to flow through him, and he called it the muse, where just like everything would start to click, like the creative, like all the creative juices are just flowing instantly. And maybe there's a shortcut to that. Maybe you just do a ton of blow and get blasted on vodka. You could just immediately tap right into that.
So maybe part of it, just thinking behaviorally, when people talk about the muse, it's like, well, you got to be in front of the typewriter or the computer or whatever, have pen and paper in hand. It's just like, you got to make yourself available for the muse. So that may be where the coke comes in handy, just like that. And the alcohol to take the edge off the coke, or vice versa. Like they sort of complement each other. But that providing that fuel to be just like, okay, now I'm going to sit down and throw some cigarettes in there. That like, and just, you're just like spending more time at the typewriter. Like whether it's Hunter S. Thompson or any of these, like there's all these cases of like
Stephen King,
wild
wrote
drug
all
use.
his fucking books on
was that alcohol or coke?
Alcohol and coke, I think.
Okay, another.
I think when he wrote Cujo, he was just doing mountains of coke.
Wow. And bands, I mean, like the MC5 talked about plenty of they just come to mind. I remember reading an article years ago about them saying coke was a huge part of their creative process, which is, and some people say with stimulants, they're more tunnel vision. It reduces their creativity, but they can focus. But then others say like, no, man, that was, made me incredibly creative.
Right.
And maybe that, and this is all speculative, like, but maybe that's where the alcohol comes in to.
Yes.
Create
that synergy.
Yeah. And we know very little about like drugs themselves individually. So there's almost no drug. I mean, there's some drug interaction research, but certainly nothing along the lines of creativity for anything. So we don't know that scientifically. I'd love to point to, the 1979 study by so-and-so, like just doesn't exist.
I was reading this story the other day, this article where they interviewed somebody from the Rolling Stones, and he was talking about how back in the day when they would perform their live shows, they're like go to festivals and perform all day, like do, multiple 40-minute sets, that they would just have a giant pile of cocaine behind the subs, like the subwoofers and stuff like that. They had massive stacks of speakers and subwoofers. And like just right behind it, they wouldn't have to go backstage. They would just walk behind the speakers, and they would get cocaine manufactured from Merck.
So it's 100% pharmaceutical grade.
So they were, and the way they were explaining it in the article, and maybe you could confirm or deny if this is possible, but they were saying that you would not get the come down from coke because from this Merck cocaine. They're saying like typically when you do cocaine, just like you do any stimulant that like hammers your dopamine receptors, there's going to be a price to pay at the end of it. There's like a come down effect where you start to go through
Right.
hell. And he was saying that didn't happen with this Merc.
So I'm skeptical because, you know, I mean, just like pure caffeine, like you get a come down from caffeine, you know, and you're going to get a come down from stimulants. But I'm also open to the idea of just speculating here, maybe to the degree that some of the adulterants, and there's a lot of adulterants in most cocaine.
What's an adulterant?
Oh, just other stuff they throw in there.
Oh, okay. Like to cut it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes horribly, you know, just, you know, what it could be anything. I mean, which is kind of scary.
Right.
Whether it be a nerd or something that has some effects itself, you know, that's thrown in there. But to the degree that some of those adulterants, those other things they throw in to thin it out, could have negative side effects. Maybe some of those are accounting for. So there could be some truth. You'll probably get some degree of a come down of even pure cocaine.
Right.
But maybe it is less so to, you know, depending on what the, you know, street coke is cut with.
Right.
But it kind of makes sense. I mean, not too long ago, I remember watching all of these. I'd seen them before, but I hadn't really focused on. But these, there's these videos you can see on YouTube. It was in the Rolling Stones did. It was called Rock and Roll Circus. So there's a live studio performance where they had this whole audience there, and the Beatles were in the audience and other bands. And I don't know why I bring it up. It's just a random like performance, but it's like, you know, in the day, and like Brian Jones was still alive, so still relatively early days for the Stones, and just like Mick Jagger. I mean, he just the energy that he put in. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all. He was totally coked up because he was so just like so alive and so just on the edge and just such a good performer. And I don't want to send the message you got to be on coke. Coke is very dangerous. But I also want to, it's like, like, you know, drugs are very powerful tools, people, good and bad. And it just kind of mind blowing because you hear this, you know, like, oh yeah, Mick Jagger and whatever, he's 80 years old now. And like there was a reason they became who they were. It's like this remarkable, just, you know, the passion and just his performing. He takes his shirt off and he's just like so connecting with it. And it just strikes me that he's like connecting so strongly with the audience and just is like, he's firing on all cylinders. But that seems like a total coke thing. And this is where nicotine has its strongest rewarding effects, is making everything else in the environment, not just through a Pavlov's dog, bell and whistle through association, but through a direct effect in making everything else in the environment rewarding. Which is why nicotine is just this powerful psychoactive in terms of its addiction potential, in terms of people like really enjoy using it. But you ask someone, and I remember when I was young, I like, what's the deal about tobacco? It's like, you know, people try different things and they understand, you know, they, you know, use cannabis and it's like, yeah, they're intoxicated. They feel the effect. You know, tobacco is like this very subtle thing. People aren't really high. People don't usually use that language. It's a psychoactive effect, but you kind of think about it. You know, what do people talk about with, you know, smoking, you know, you know, oh, it's great after a meal or before a meal, and the classic, like a cigarette after sex, and like it, and then like with work, you know, making things like writing paper, the great writers, you know, smoking away, skipping lunch and just smoking. And so it has this sort of, and research with rats suggests this, that even like say, putting a rat on nicotine will make just this random like house light, like a red light coming on, like more rewarding. They'll press a bar to get that red light to come on more so after nicotine. Not because the light signals the delivery of nicotine, just because just seeing a red light is cooler when you're on nicotine. So which kind of explains why this drug is so addictive, but it doesn't make you high.
Right.
Because it kind of makes just subtly the world becomes more rewarding. You know, people are kind of opens aperture a little bit.
Yes.
And everything else becomes a little tuned in. And it's working through that acetylcholine system, which has a big role in focus.
The nicotine stuff is interesting because I've heard multiple things that, you know, it's not necessarily bad for you other than the fact it's vasorestrictive. It's very addictive, but Are you aware of any other negative effects or downsides of using it other than obviously
the smoking? Yeah. So the there's downsides to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And people might disagree with me on this because there's you're kind of weighing like all kinds of evidence here,
right.
But to me, nicotine outside of smoking or even vaping, which is still probably going to be much safer than smoking, but nonetheless, you're inhaling something. There's going to be downsides. But like say in nicotine pouches, any concern, including cardiovascular concern, is in the same general category as caffeine. So some people shouldn't use caffeine, and especially a lot of caffeine, like if you're at severe risk of heart disease or if you have anxiety. Like the first thing your doctor should ask you before prescribing Xanax should be like, let's talk about how much coffee and soda you drink. And insomnia, before you get a script of Ambien or what have you, first question be like, let's talk about your caffeine use because maybe you just need to cut out your caffeine.
Right.
Nicotine is sort of in that same category where there's downside, but the cardiovascular effects are relatively, they're there, but more in the caffeine range. I mean, a good amount of the cardiovascular downside from tobacco smoking comes from the carbon monoxide that you get from smoking, which is nothing to do with the nicotine, and something that you don't get with vaping either. You don't get the,
Yeah, it's the delivery mechanism, right? Especially with those pouches, the nicotine pouches. Those things will eat your gums away, from what I understand, pretty bad. There's a lot of people who've had serious issues with their gums, like having a pouch in their lip all day long.
Yeah, and some of that is going to be, we're going to have, it's such a new thing that we're going to have to wait to see.
Yeah.
I mean, to what degree is it related to the classic, like cocaine burning out the inside of the nose, another alkaloid, which I think someone has to do a lot of cocaine to get that, like what was it? Stevie Nicks, I think, was reported to have that. Fleetwood, like they were doing a lot of coke.
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of money to do that much coke. That's one of the things about coke. Like most people don't have the money to go that far.
Right.
The way a rock star does.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we'll see. And I would say though, in general, like there's a risk to everything.
Mm-hmm.
But like if someone's trying to quit smoking, these pouches are basically the same thing as FDA approved, like nicotine gum, nicotine patch, nicotine lozenge.
Yeah.
It's basically, I would say it's probably better technology than the nicotine gum and nicotine lozenges.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the pouch, it can give you a little more of a quick transdermal administration. Orders of magnitude less risk than smoking cigarettes.
Yes.
And, vaping is still going to be, again, we're not going to know the final answer for a few decades, but there's a lot of reason to think that vaping is substantially less risky, not without risk, but compared to smoking. Basically, if someone's smoking cigarettes, any of these things are better options.
Yeah.
and nicotine pouches would be the least risky of all of them compared to vaping or smoking. So I kind of think about this when you see some of the regulations in California or whatnot about can't have any flavors, and it's like, honestly, you could have a discussion about should we be subsidizing that. I mean, the classic thing is, and I'm not saying we should, but I'm saying that would be a reasonable argument to the degree that it's helping people quit smoking. The classic concern, though, is like this balance of, we don't want kids to use it. We don't want it to be attractive for kids, but we also got to keep in mind those same properties are things that can make it more attractive to a 63-year-old smoker that's been trying to quit. Maybe they like that whatever menthol flavor, that cherry flavor. And
you can't buy fucking menthol cigarettes in California? That's what I heard.
That's probably true. I think that's true.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. And so you got to like,
that's I heard a clip of, I think it was Cat Williams talking about it. That's racist because black people love menthols. Black people love Newports. Now you're denying them their Newports?
Yeah, there's big differences there. Yeah. I mean, they're very popular.
It's ridiculous. Like, what are we, babies? Jimmy's not allowed to have a Newport because it's too flavorful, or you're not allowed to have a coffee-flavored Zin because, that's going to be too dangerous. Meanwhile, you have people literally doing heroin on the streets unregulated, shitting themselves.
Right.
But
Right, right.
It's like California is so fucking crazy.
Over-regulation,
We went,
just
me and him
virtue
went to,
signaling.
Me and him went to San Francisco, and we were visiting somebody to do a podcast a couple years ago, and you couldn't buy nicotine pouches that weren't flavored. They were all just unflavored nicotine pouches.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring my own, unfortunately. So I was like stuck with these unflavored nicotine pouches. Yet we were walking down the street, and the guy we were there to meet was like, where's your car? Where's your car parked or whatever? Like, make sure you lock your car, because every car gets broken into here, and there's no repercussions for the people that break into cars. And we were walking down the street right in front of his apartment, and there was literally a purse emptied out on the ground, like in front of a car. And the laws there are they allow people to do that. They can't get arrested for fucking breaking into somebody's car.
And same thing with and I seem to hear that they'd reversed it or were going to, but like with shoplifting.
Oh yeah.
Like they're basically, I mean, now what I've heard from folks in the Bay Area is that their rule is don't lock your car because you can get your window broken out. Like, one, don't keep valuables in there, but keep it unlocked. That way, like, I'd rather the person open the door, check for change, there's nothing here. And you're good. You don't have a broken window.
Yes. Yeah, you're right about that. Maybe I got the story wrong. Maybe he told us to just leave it unlocked and make sure nothing was left in there.
Well, I'm sure there's all kinds of strategies when you're dealing with that type of environment where people just, I mean, it's so pervasive, from my understanding, that just, and you get this with drug policy in general, and I realize not all of that is related to drugs, but it's a general principle that there are unintended consequences everywhere. And you have to be really, really careful about things that, like, this looks good on the surface. Okay, let's play it out. Let's get as much evidence as we can. Like, for example, having really high taxes on other nicotine products and eliminating completely all other attractive qualities. Like, you can't get, coffee flavor. It's like, okay, you're trying to make them less attractive to kids, but also we have to weigh that against, the smoker who might have done that as a substitute.
Yeah.
And therefore is, maybe not now going to die from lung cancer or heart disease. Right. So there's, if you go all out on any one side or the other, just with sort of virtue signaling as the goal, there's going to be harms there.
This morning, I read that article by Michael Pollan in the New Yorker.
Right. Yeah.
About the spiritual professionals study at Johns Hopkins.
The clergy study, religious professionals. Yeah. So I'm an author on it. Yeah.
Can you lay out this whole story for us and like how it started, who was behind it, and then what ended up happening with the whole thing? Yeah.
So the idea is, so we had a history of doing this work that was first published in 2006, 2008, a series of studies looking at in spiritually interested people, what are the basic effects? So this isn't treating disorders, but what are the effects from just people interested in taking these things spiritually? And this is sort of a follow-up to that work. It's also a follow-up basically to the old Good Friday study from, was it 1962, that was conducted at Harvard by Wally Pankey, who was a student of Tim Leary, who was his PhD advisor. And it's called the Good Friday study because they were in the basement of the Marsh Chapel in the Boston area. And there's a very charismatic preacher delivering the Good Friday service. And they were the people who were on psilocybin or an active placebo, niacin. They were in the basement listening to the service. And they found that the people who received psilocybin largely had what we call mystical experiences. They were very spiritual, had the sense of unity and these other aspects of the mystical experience. And some follow-up work that Rick Doblin, the head of MAPS, did 25 years later. He did a lot of digging to find most of these people who were in that study. And these were seminary students, I should say. So that's a key there. Those were religious leaders in training. And these people largely said, yes, they still valued that experience. Many of them said that it had informed their life in the priesthood or what have you. And so this study had threads from all of that work, our work with spiritually interested non-clergy, threads to the Good Friday study that found those, subjectively positive effects from those folks. And so it was set up like that, getting people from different religious faiths. It ended up being, 21 Christians and 5 rabbis and 1 Muslim imam and 1 Buddhist. I think that's what it turned out to be in terms of, so mostly Christian.
So who was behind the initial idea and to get this study done and get it funded and start? Like who was behind the start of it?
So the initial idea was really a convergence of a number of people who had interest. Bill Richards at Hopkins, Tony Bossis at NYU, Roland Griffiths, myself. I thought it was a very interesting study. So really, I think all of the investigators had, an interest in it, and there were, funders that were interested in the effects. Now, a lot of stuff ended up happening over the course of the conduct of the study that sort of became controversial, and I wasn't aware of all of it. I was aware of some of it during the course of the study, but that's kind of what some of what Michael Pollan wrote about. That's what it was all about. Things like funders working on the studies. I knew that. I advised against it, but I wasn't the so-called PI, the principal investigator. So
funders, people that were funding the study, were coming in and participating in some of the...
Yeah, not as patients, but as a therapeutic-like role, a so-called session guide, and in doing interviews with people at the end of the study, doing qualitative analysis for interviews. And so what I didn't know is that some of this wasn't even reported to the review board, that, there was someone on there who was functioning as a study team member who wasn't listed on the IRB protocol, a funder, and the funding relationship hadn't been revealed to the IRB. And this was in the context of that individual who I don't think did anything wrong. It's not their job to scope out these rules as a non-academic and not a faculty at the medical schools. But NYU did the right thing and asked their reviewer, can they participate in helping to run the study? And they said no. Well, she ended up doing that at Hopkins. And apparently, as we know now, it wasn't, not only was that relationship not reported, but they weren't included, even listed as someone working on the study.
Oh, wow.
And then there were other things. So there was Travis, I know you've talked to him about this. I forget the degree that you focus on this in your interview, but Travis has written about, and others, the relationship, some of the funders subsequently funded some of the participants in the study to start organizations to focus on psychedelics in religion, to sort of kindle interest in this area of psychedelics and in their various faiths. And then there was a retreat that some of the scientists had a role in, but I was completely unaware of after the study to get the participants together to presumably look at paths forward about the implications going forward. So there was some of the concern was related to, it ended up looking more like a mission with the goal in mind to introduce psychedelics, to kindle this interest in religious practice, sort of more explicitly, rather than having just, this scientific question. And so I think there's good science there, and that's why I remained an author on the paper. And that's, I don't like being in these situations where, if it reaches a certain level where I think, well, we can't trust the science, I wouldn't want to be an author on the paper. And other situations like that came up with, for example, the cancer study, where I caught wind and then investigated, for example, a participant who, in an interview with the principal investigator, they described their experience, but then on the questionnaire, ranking how meaningful this was in your life, they gave a certain rating, and then a discussion with the principal investigator. Oh, well, it sounded like your description was more impressive than that. Are you sure you don't want to change your rating?
Oh, interesting.
And they changed, and I prompted, hey, like, concerned about that because have we ever done the opposite? If we ever said, your rating looks more impressive than what I heard, like probably not. And so that was, in that study, that was the one case I was aware of and was told, well, it would be reassessed with the participant, which I never got confirmation of. But again, if it had reached a certain threshold, I would have, made a formal, issue out of it, but it didn't rise to that level. And the reason that some of this is disappointing is this is something you don't need to fluff up. In the right context, I mean, I'm convinced from not just data, but from the now hundreds of participants that I've talked to, a good number of which I've been in the room with them in this so-called guide role. But
what was the drug administered?
That was psilocybin.
Psilocybin, okay.
And everything I've mentioned so far. And so, why risk, muddying the waters with this type of thing? When to me, it looks like there's a real effect there. In other words, that yes, many people have what they claim to be very meaningful experiences that they hold in a spiritual light, and that they report, positive long-term effects on their life and well-being. But, I'm also concerned that, in some of the studies, like, have we really looked at the negative? So there was sort of like an explicit rejection of things like assessing the credibility of the blind, or which is to say simply asking the person afterwards, do you think you got the drug or the placebo, in the sense that you're going to get an answer that could be used as ammunition because most people do correctly identify it. But, we want more data than not. And you could do things statistically to at least, imperfectly to, once you have the data, you could look at in regressions, for example, how much that might have accounted for some of the positive results. But then other things like simply asking people at their long-term follow-ups, have you used psychedelics again? And, sometimes, and it's certainly not normative, but sometimes someone's introduced to a psychedelic in one of these studies and they get really into it. I've even seen cases where like they become a neo-shaman and are doing these things more on a regular basis. And, again, with the concern that, this could be used as ammunition against this research. But I just think, one, that's not right. But even strategically, look, if these things are approved by the FDA, like, we want to know what the outcomes are going to be. Something could be on the market, and it could get plenty of drugs are pulled from the market after they're approved. So it's not just like, once one of these things like psilocybin or MDMA were approved, then, we've achieved the result, the world's going to be a better place. You're going to get some of these effects. Like you are going to kindle some interest. My impression is that it's not, that it's a small minority, but you're going to introduce psychedelics to people who are using in whatever you want to call it, unsupervised, whatever. Yeah. Someone scores some mushrooms and they go hiking with it, this type of thing, right. and then there's questions about that. Most of that is not going to be harmful, as we know. Most people that use psychedelics aren't harmed by it, but some are. But we just have to understand the full landscape, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we shouldn't be afraid to we shouldn't be operating under a context in which we are, just had this mission in mind to kind of mainstream psychedelics no matter what. Right. Because one, it's not right, and two, just even if that was your goal to mainstream, like it's going to backfire. Like the best policy is transparency, and
Have you ever heard of Joe Rogan's fart theory?
Maybe if you describe it, not off the top of my head.
He used to talk about this theory he had called the fart theory, where basically, like, if we didn't have smell or a nose and someone farted, you would have no clue. You would just be sitting there basking in someone's fart.
Yes.
Right?
And most of reality is like that. We don't have senses for most of reality.
Right. That's that's the theory. Yeah. Like, if we didn't have, like, how many other things are out there that we haven't evolved senses or organs to detect?
Right, and if it's not functional, we wouldn't have evolved it.
Right.
I think about this with the psi phenomenon, which I'm very interested. So whether it's telepathy and whatnot, I'm intrigued by the research. Yeah. And even informally conducted a little bit of this myself, not as a formal study, at university, but just myself having read some of Rupert Sheldrake's stuff and replicated like his telepathy, like can you guess who's calling you on the phone in these controlled trials. And so my guess is that there's something there, but my hypothesis with any of that, okay, if it is real, and we got to keep our skeptical hats on, but like you're saying, like the fart theory, like we don't know what we don't know. Like we probably are aware of way less than 1% of reality. If some of these extraordinary phenomena exist, if they're real, these are just, ultimately I would say they're natural. They're not supernatural because there's some level of nature we're just not aware of.
Right.
I mean, I think everything we know about science should point to that humility. I mean, even with like color, like we see this insignificant fraction of the EM, the spectrum of EM. Yeah, and like sound doesn't really exist. It's just our interpretation of vibrations through the air.
We can't see infrared or near infrared light, right? So that's an interesting thing.
Right.
And then there's like earthworms. Earthworms only have a very narrow amount of sensory input. So like you could like touch an earthworm, pick it up. It would never even know you're there.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
And then you get into like, I think
so like
Daniel Hoffman I think it's Hoffman, but he's been on some podcasts, including Lex Friedman.
Daniel?
I think his last name is Hoffman. Mm-hmm. His first name, I'm not 100% sure on the Daniel, Douglas, or anyway.
Okay.
But his, I believe he's a psychologist, but very much is informed by physics. And he's really very much focused on this idea that time space itself is just this illusion. Donald, I had the D right. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Dr. Hoffman, Donald Hoffman. But yeah, he is a fascinating account that he says the evidence suggests that there's every reason to think that just time and space themselves are just kind of are the GUI, or the operating, that's the desktop, and what's underneath, we have no idea. It's like ultimately the machine code, the countless billions of on-off switches that creates this, whatever, the menu that we think we're operating on the Mac or the or Windows. But that we're as disconnected from whatever reality really is as far as possible, even to the degree that time and space are just these kind of functional illusions. Right. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think we need to have this humility with all this, like, the physicists, I mean, they, talk about the potential existence. I mean, string theorists talk about all these other dimensions that might exist that we're unaware of, and yet who knows? But we should have some humility that reality might be so complex that we just...
Right.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the downsides in science, like, that I've tried, probably not, definitely not totally successfully, but to try to stay open. I feel like the more you learn, the more you become a learned person, the more you kind of dismiss things, and like, unless something's been shown to my satisfaction, it definitely doesn't exist. Right. That's definitely bullshit. Whereas I think the right balance is like, okay, I'm not going to confirm something, or but I'm also not going to summarily dismiss it. So I think we should kind of think more of a kind of a Bayesian framework, instead of saying, well, unless...
Have lots of strong opinions loosely held.
Yeah, be open, and then kind of think more, okay, like, how likely, what's your number? Maybe you're 95% likely to think that, or maybe you're 60% likely to think that the UAP phenomenon is extraterrestrial, but, there's another percent that maybe these are advanced military, things, it's like, you don't have to be black or white. You could be open and just say, no, we don't know. And I'm interested in more evidence, but not kind of be in this framework that until something's been completely proven, I'm saying it's complete, malarkey. Yes. Because psychedelics were that way. I mean, the whole idea, when I started working psychedelics, it's like, it sounded absurd to most scientists, most psychiatrists, psychologists, like that experiences with psychedelics would help people overcome these mental health disorders. Yeah. It sounds absurd. Because people say, oh, no, I've seen people in the ER tripping on too much acid, and like, that's it's not good for you. Like, what do you mean? Like,
right. Yeah. Going to like the idea of that, like Rupert Sheldrake and the morphic resonance stuff, and the idea that there's more out there that we can't perceive, that exists. I mean, there's definitely evidence of this stuff, right? Like the telepathy stuff, the Stargate remote viewing stuff. Like there is scientific evidence that this stuff is real to a certain degree, right? It's been measured, and then there's been tons of money that's been dumped on it with the United States to actually do this stuff and use it for spying or all kinds of things. So like,
I think there's a phenomenon there.
There is, yeah.
I think there's very likely, I would put it at 5+% that there's a real, and
yeah,
because I've delved into the evidence, and I didn't take any of this seriously until one day, probably like 20 years ago, where a buddy of mine just dropped one of these telepathy papers on my desk coming down the hall. I was like, Johnson, take a look at this. And I thought, oh, that's got to be bullshit. I would have learned about it in graduate school.
Yeah.
It was just like, it's just a very, suboptimal way of thinking.
I think that humans used to be way more. I think it's possible that we, way back millions of years ago, were telepathic, like straight up telepathic.
And language has actually gotten in the way.
Language and developing technology, like the written word, like being able to offload our memory.
Right.
Like we probably had amazing memory. We could probably memorize everything. So we would have had to survive, right?
We've already seen it in our own lifetimes. Look at our dependence on cell phones from back when I was,
Yep, that.
You can't remember. I used to know all the phone numbers.
Yeah.
Like now.
Yeah, I think technology is just making our senses atrophy.
I think that makes sense. And that reminds me of something I've thought about with these kind of extraordinary phenomena that may exist, that natural selection is going to work on whatever works.
Yeah.
So if there is, whether it's something we're aware of or whether it's something more subtle, like whatever is behind the telepathy, if it's real, whether it's some quantum entanglement, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. But if it can be leveraged by natural selection, as long as there's variation and there's selective advantage. And so in other words, if this critter of whatever type, if it nudged him just a tiny, tiny bit to be more likely to find that food or find the mate, had they not somehow had that thing that detected the quantum entanglement, that's a random example, to be clear. I do not know. Or whether it's some other dimensions that we exist in that we're not aware of, like the physicists speculate on. We're gonna use it. We're gonna use whatever. Natural selection is gonna find a way through this seemingly infinite push towards variation.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be co-opted. So there may be that, like, if it helped us survive, and my dog does things that just
right. Yeah, dogs and cats.
I can't explain.
Right.
Like, just seems to know. It seems to know when we're about to arrive at a destination. She knows, and even when we make stops in the way where we stop at a stop sign so it's not about slowing down, but like when we get to the final, like somehow again, it's not a controlled experiment. I could be fooling myself, but I'm intrigued by it. Like it seems like there's some sense, and like knowing when I'm going to come home.
Right. Like going back to that fart theory, like there's everyone's heard the story of you walk into a house where there was a murder and like the energy's off, or like just the general idea of bad energy in certain places. That could be something that could be part of this.
I think
whole
we
thing.
Should be open to it.
Something that we can't sense, or like you alluded to, your dog or a cat. Like cats always have weird senses, and they can smell energy on people, and like sometimes dogs like people, sometimes dogs don't like people for whatever reason. What do we what is that? What sort of an invisible layer, or what sort of fucking energy is there that could be palpable if you had the senses that they had, that we're completely and are invisible to us,
And if you take Rupert Sheldrake's research seriously, and this isn't the morphic resonance stuff, it's like the telepathy, He published like a bunch of variations on this stuff and found that, again, unless you just dismiss it all, like what he reported, and unless he made it all up, like it seems that there's a trait. Some people are good at it, like bowling. Some people are really good at it. Some aren't. And no matter how much you practice, some people are just never going to be that great at bowling, or you name the sport.
Yeah.
But some people really have that's both practicable, but also there's an innate talent. And so, and the same thing, you mentioned the Stargate, like, stuff, like the people that were involved with those programs, they all talk about this. Like some people, they find these superstars that seem to be really good at whatever this is, and that were good at remote viewing, for example, and that it's not something everyone, like maybe everyone can do it, but they're not necessarily to the same degree, and not necessarily something that's going to be functional for everyone. Right. But some people, like my wife seems to be one of those people that just kind of knows things. And she kind of has these things in her family. I think if there's something there, it seems like it runs in her family. Like they're mountain people, and there's like just these weird things that have happened, that just these stories that just make you wonder. Yeah. And she has a sense for people, like, watch out for that dude. Like, and that turned out to be right, that I was just
That's interesting.
oblivious to.
That's really interesting, because there has been people who have studied and done brain scans of people who have been able to witness like paranormal phenomena, or people, I think they took groups of people who witnessed paranormal stuff, whether it be ghosts or spirits or even UFOs, and they did some sort of study of them, and they found out that their basal ganglia what was really dense with neurons, or the caudate putamen. I think that's a similar.
Yeah, I don't remember the particular areas, but yeah, I at least, I was aware of this, the headline level of these findings.
And I don't remember what the significance of the basal ganglia or the caudate putamen was, but there was, that would be interesting to understand, like, is there any implication to that part of the brain, or is there any way you can affect that part of the brain, or that part of the brain is affected by psychedelics at all? I wonder, like, is there a way that if in 1,000 years from now, if we're like on the trajectory human beings are on right now, if it is true that we had some sort of more sensory abilities in the past that we've lost now, if you extrapolate that into the future and we lose more of them because of technology, and technology is like, technology is compensating for all this stuff now, so we're not having it. Like, I wonder if there's a way to turn the clock back, maybe with psychedelics, or that's not the right way of putting it, or like to maintain some of that stuff with psychedelics. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of a title of one of McKenna's books, The Archaic Revival. I mean, he very much viewed them in that sense, that it's sort of like an ability to kind of, kindle something that we've lost. Perhaps.
Now, what about, you talk about plasticity, like what specifically can psychedelics do as far as plasticity or rewiring your brain, or are there any sort of measurable results?
Yes, unfortunately, most of those, or nearly all of those, are going to be in rodents. So, because you can cut up brains, and we don't want to do that. The IRBs don't let us do that, thankfully.
I wonder if you could do like an IQ test on somebody before and after like a ton of psychedelics.
So that's been looked at. We don't see a general increase in intelligence, although who's to say that, it could be that it wasn't done in the right way, or maybe there's some very narrow, like more particular aspect of intelligence that could be enhanced. But it seems to be more of a personality than an intelligence thing.
Interesting.
But the neuroplasticity, well, first of all, that's a general term. It can mean different things in the brain. So what's been shown in rodents is what's called dendritic branching. So the neuron with the branches, like a tree that come off. So growing new branches, synaptogenesis, which is the connections between the different neurons, often with the branches. So forming new connections, and then probably the least amount of evidence, but some evidence for neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons. And so there's evidence, at least some evidence, for all of those from multiple labs, at least the synaptogenesis and dendritic branching. But I also remind people that plenty of drugs like cocaine have shown neuroplastic effects. So
Really?
Yeah. So
The same branch building stuff too?
yeah. Now, research needs to figure out the potential differences. So it may be that this doesn't, and this is where part of my background comes in handy, because from one lens, I had to say I'm a comparative behavioral pharmacologist. So I always think, okay, it's the same thing with the thought of the default mode network, the decoupling of the default mode network being the embodiment of the ego, and that the decoupling of that under psychedelics is a key mechanism for psychedelics. Well, alcohol does that, amphetamine does that, cocaine does that, THC does that. So that's not you would have to explain. Maybe that's more of a signature of just not feeling like yourself, like feeling intoxicated.
Right.
So you got to watch out for some of these stories, and you got to ask, what do other drugs do? Is this truly unique? Now, it may be, there's a guy that, Alex Kwan, I think I saw a presentation where he looks like he's figuring out some downstream effects that might distinguish psychedelics from some of these other substances in terms of the network activity that neuroplasticity results in. But it's very much an active. We're going to have to figure out a lot more to know for sure whether the neuroplasticity seen in animals is part of what's happening in humans. Well, one, is it happening in humans? Probably is. But two, how important is that for the therapeutic effects? My guess is that it is, but it is just a guess. I mean, there's also the experience that people learn from and has this impact on them. And so there's a lot to unpack there, and it's a very So there's a lot of threads about how psychedelics work. You know, they make the brain communicate with itself very dramatically, acutely. In other words, when you're tripping, there's this massive change in brain network dynamics, which are communication patterns across the brain. A key question, and I have a study that's we haven't analyzed the data, but it's looking at people long term who have quit smoking with psilocybin. The $1 million question with that stuff is, in terms of the therapeutics, is there a change in brain network dynamics long term? There may or may not be, because of course the brain, and it's very important to know what the brain is doing when you're on the psychedelic, but therapeutically, the most important thing is what's it doing 6 months later when you're still less depressed, or you're still not drinking, or whatever the therapeutic target of that study was. So that, so there's that, the neuroplasticity, the brain network function. And then there's stuff at the psychological level. And I don't think it's one or the other, psychology or biology, unless you're a dualist, presumably. These are just different levels of analysis. It's not one or the other. They're just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And my presumption is that every psychological change or psychological phenomenon has a biological correlate.
Yes.
And we're probably just at the limits. I mean, you remember what you had for breakfast this morning or whatever. We don't have the technology now to go in and read exactly what those brain patterns are that pulls up that constitute that memory, but one day we might. But presumably there is that biological side. So with that caveat aside, at the psychological level, I think that's where we have most traction in really understanding how psychedelics are working. It seems like when it works, it's like good psychotherapy. It's not like, I just took this pill, like whether it's, antidepressants or whatever, you take the pill every day and it has, oh, no, I'm feeling better. People have a story to tell you.
Yeah.
Like a life experience, like psychotherapy, or probably more commonly, like a life experience. Oh, let me tell you about, the first time I visited another country and knew what it was like to be the only person of my race within a crowd of 10,000 people. Let me tell you the first time was like to fall in love, or what it was like to have my kid and how that changed everything. It seems like it's an experience.
Yes.
And
it's a very reflective experience, especially like when you were talking about the bad trips earlier, because sometimes the bad trips can be you get the most out of those. You kind of like learn the most about yourself, or figure out problems, or find ways of looking at problems from a different perspective than you're used to. You get off of the normal vibration of waking consciousness, And the research is consistent with that. So in different ways, so scales of mental flexibility afterwards are increased. And then more kind of molar temporal perspective is
personality. So openness to experience. Multiple labs, including work that I've done, have shown that openness to experience is it's one of the big 5 personality traits that increases. Not all of the studies have found that, which is to be expected. I mean, personality is a tough thing to push around, but it strikes me as credible that, so openness to experience refers to thinking of a tolerance for different points of view and even holding seemingly mutually exclusive points of view at the same time.
Yeah.
An appreciation for aesthetics. That's openness to experience. So that kind of the perspective taking. I mean, so people, just countless stories of people having psychedelic experiences, and they look at themselves in a different way. And sometimes it's this aha effect, like we're fish, like looking at the water. Yeah. It's like, this is our life. For someone who's depressed or addicted, and like they zoom out and they're like, holy cow, like what in the world? And with cancer, it's like, oh my God, this is dominating my life. I'm not dead yet. I'm deciding to react like this and let this thing, my quality of life is 0 because I'm choosing to view it this way. And so much of the suffering isn't the direct effect. It's like how I'm choosing my life. Like, I'm not going on vacations. I'm not getting out in the sun with my grandkids, this type of thing. And so even though people had told themselves that stuff before, it's just like with depression and addiction, you can tell yourself cognitively a million times, but people have this, when it works, people can have this deep sense of this very visceral change in perspective taking. And they're like, my God, I've been doing this for like cigarette smoking for decades. And I've been telling myself, like, I don't want to do this. Like, this isn't who I am. I go to the gym, I do blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Try to eat healthy. I'm trying to set an example for my kids. Like, what the hell am I doing? And it really can hit them like hard. Like, this is like, doesn't fit.
Right.
And somehow just when you're doing it every day, it's just habituation. And same thing with like depression, like thinking about yourself as this failure. And it's like you just get so used to this and it's just the normal thing. But somehow psychedelics zoom people out where they could see it for what it is. And they're like, what in the world?
Right.
And it's so, because I think it can touch on ground truth. Like, and that's why it lasts the next day. Yeah, they're not tripping anymore. But they're like, it was so compelling and it seemed so self-validating, which is part of the mystical experience, the self-validating aspect of the experience, that the next day they're like, yeah, that wasn't just some drug effect. Maybe it opened a window for me or whatever, but like the way I looked at it then, that was the right way to look at it. Or people with PTSD who just like, I remember one Marine giving a talk about his treatment with MDMA and just saying, like, he just viewed himself as a monster because he accidentally blew a little kid up and it just like shattered him. And like how he finally like stepped outside of that. Like he saw himself as something different and he like was able to sleep for the first time in like years. Wow. It's very, like, I think the real action is that stuff we're nowhere close to understanding at the brain level. In terms of like how that manifests, like how these dark pits that we fall into, like with PTSD and anxiety and depression and addiction, like how that's so distributed mentally and presumably like throughout the brain.
Right.
And
physiologically, how it affects your body.
Yeah, it's such a top, because the brain is tied to everything, and just like the way they're existing in the world is just, the tentacles are everywhere, and how they can, when they go to the root of these things, like it can have these manifestations like that are broad.
Now, for someone, for example, like that soldier who accidentally blew up a kid and was viewing himself as a monster and couldn't sleep at night, how do you determine which type of psychedelic to use for somebody like that, whether it be MDMA or psilocybin or even, I don't know, DMT is ever used? Like, how do you determine?
We don't really know, and not a single study yet has looked at that. That guy was in the study that was MDMA for PTSD, one of the MAP studies.
Oh, okay.
And, the idea is that MDMA was viewed as sort of, maybe for PTSD as maybe the right place to start because it's a gentler, you don't have the reality shattering effects, the full bad trip of just not even knowing one as a person anymore. They got permanently insane. Like that's the flavor of the bad trip on psilocybin or LSD. flavor of a bad trip with MDMA is like more of emotional, going to those emotional dark places. And so I think that was the rationale. But I've recently finished a survey study where we asked people, have you used psychedelics, any number of them, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, blah, blah. Like, have you used it intentionally for therapeutic reasons? Not in a clinical trial, but just like whatever, whether it's underground therapy or you just took it with a buddy or whatever. And whether you took it to treat PTSD or depression or anxiety. And we actually found similar rates, like if you chalk it up to like how many say it helped and how many said, didn't make it worse, didn't make it better, and how many said it made them worse. That distribution looked remarkably similar no matter what the psychedelic was and no matter what the disorder was.
Interesting.
So, it's an open question, but that would suggest it's almost like you could play the old Mad Libs game. Like, give me a random adjective, give me a random noun, pick a random, like MDMA for cocaine addiction. Like, probably could make it work. I mean, we'd needed to test all this, but that would be consistent with these very general mechanisms, though. It's not like, the drugs that are the typical drugs used to treat these disorders, which are treating surface level symptoms. They're treating like these core psychological issues that are really all in common. Like, all of these disorders have one aspect of people being stuck in some suboptimal pattern.
Yeah.
And I kind of view it all as an addiction because therapeutically, most of my work has been within addiction. But even you can view depression and PTSD as a form of addiction. Like, you're addicted to this suboptimal pattern of thought. So the pattern isn't like grabbing the cigarette, grabbing the drink, grabbing the Coke. The pattern is thinking about myself that way. When I'm, when I get some ambiguous data from the world, someone doesn't look happy. Oh, it's about me, rather than there's this negative attribution. It's like there's an addiction. There's a stuckness that's self-reinforcing too. Once you're in there, it's hard to get out, just like with the drug. And I think the same thing with PTSD. There's this kind of stuckness. Robin Carhart Harris calls it a canalization. And so he very much focuses on the brain and the way the brain activity gets entrenched in certain patterns, and that psychedelics can
unwind all of it.
Right, like shake up the snow globe.
Wow.
Or the way Mendel Kaelen, a Dutch researcher, did work in London with Robin, but said it's like you're sledding or skiing down a slope, and if it's a well-worn track, like you fall into the grooves of the previous sleds or skis.
Yeah.
But like psychedelic experience is like a big blizzard that just blasts the mountain with fresh powder. So now you're like, oh yeah, I kept following those tracks like into the trees there, and hit those moguls that like screwed me up. Like,
right.
And I was like, oh, I could just kind of turn more easily and take that fresh powder into this area.
Yeah.
And you still have to make the decision yourself, but you're a little bit less stuck, with a little more ability to get some traction.
And so it's interesting to me that like one of the key, this is obviously these therapeutic effects that we're discussing now are effects that you get from psychedelics that last a while, where you're like forced to like be reflective. Now, how do you contrast that with things like DMT, where it only lasts? It's
and
not
5-methoxy DMT.
Or I've never had 5-methoxy DMT, but like DMT is so much different than those, because it's like you're not even in your body. You're gone. Your soul ejects, and then when you come back, often people don't remember a lot of the things that happened.
Yeah, so it's an open question.
Yeah,
but it does appear that there are plenty of therapeutic reports from DMT experiences. So I think it's such a complex thing, psychedelic treatments, in terms of like what's the mechanism. I think there's a lot of mechanisms. Part of it is that kind of deep reflection during the experience, where that's where something like even LSD can be better perhaps than psilocybin. You just have more time. Right. Like hours and hours and hours, like to be in the thing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes in a psilocybin session, you're like, it's like 3 PM and the person says, like being in the room with the person as a guide, like, oh, I think the effect's starting to wear off. I'm getting I just kind of like, it was rough at the beginning and now I'm just starting to get into it. And you say, oh, don't worry. there's plenty of time, just sink into it, just relax. But you're thinking like, oh no, they're totally right, man. It's like, I hope the magic keeps happening because like, yeah, this drug's wearing off. You got another half hour maybe. But with LSD, it'd be like, oh man, yeah,
right.
like, yeah, keep your seatbelt on,
Yeah.
we got another 5 hours. But so yeah, on the other side, DMT, to the degree that there's that conscious, and again, all of this is speculation. It's not there hasn't been studies comparing DMT to LSD to psilocybin that's controlling for all the other variables. But educated speculation. So yeah, DMT, it's like deep immersion. Just if there's the conscious thought is like, how do I get through the next microsecond without being shredded to bits? Like just breathe, just there's not the time to contemplate, oh, that thing I said to my wife or girlfriend last week, was I too insensitive about that? Like, what, maybe I should call my mom more often, that like, but that stuff can happen in the aftermath of DMT. So we don't know how much the therapeutic impact, like a lot of that comes after psilocybin too. Like,
what do you mean the aftermath?
Well, just it was called afterglow, even the old LSD papers back in the 50s, but like the next day where someone feels like, yeah, the drug effect is gone, but like someone's still like, they're psychologically reeling. They can be euphoric. It's not necessarily euphoric, but it can be, but they're just still, and there's some sense like if it is the plasticity that's unfolding, if that's part of the therapeutic equation, that where may be a lot of the magic is happening. And that might be why the so-called integration seems to be important. Like just the idea of like talking with the therapist, and we could probably do a lot more with that because that's all it's ever been done is talking. Like, what if you have homework during that time?
Oh yeah.
I think like, what if the experience was one of empathy and how, okay, all right, now what if for the next month you volunteer at the nursing home or whatever, it's like, let's do like some homework during that time to actually concretize like those lessons. But people, there is this sense of often there is an afterglow. Sometimes it's fleeting. Sometimes it lasts for several weeks where the aftermath is more visceral. And certainly people are contemplating the experience, about what it means and what, so I think that happens with any of these. That can often happen with any of these drugs. So, how much is that the thought process during the experience, the trip, and how much of it is that contemplation afterwards? We don't know. My sense is there's value in both. And if DMT has therapeutic impact, which I believe it does, it's probably weighted towards, your integration after it.
Right.
But some of the lessons, like, okay, you don't have the time necessarily to have the deep, contemplation about your relationship with your brother, but at this just like mystical experience, unitive level, just this idea of having your self-identity absolutely shredded and at least having some experience of just beyond words, of existing beyond the story you've told yourself for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Like that can be there with DMT.
Yeah.
And so just in the aftermath of that, taking that as fuel for looking at things with a fresh lens.
Right.
And just the sense of the awe of like, oh, reality can be, like I thought reality was this. Like reality is like, I don't even know the edges. Like, like what in the world was that? Like some sense, again, there's a lot of speculation here. To some degree, I think part of the value in psychedelics is that sort of existential shock. Just sort of like panning out to be like, dude, like your problems are here and like you're alive and like just all of reality is just this big miracle and you're a part of it. I'm feeling a lot of myself, this stuff personally to like, it's like you can't explain like sometimes with these experiences, even with DMT, they're like come out as like, this is weird. Like just this kind of like facing this idea of like, we don't even know why this is existing. This is weird. And how cool. Like, thank whatever. Yeah. Like, and I don't want to mess it up. Like, sometimes people are just so thankful for the miracle of existence. So DMT can do that.
Yes.
Of just like, yeah.